I wanted to start by just saying I represent a district that is probably a third suburban, a third exurban, and a third rural from a voter perspective, constituent perspective, but over half of my district in Minnesota's 2nd Congressional is rural. So I wanted to start with Mr. Stanley and just ask you, you spoke in your testimony to higher highway fatalities on rural non-interstate routes because of things like narrow lanes or limited shoulders, et cetera. How can federal funding be structured to better target the needs of rural Americans? And how can we better consider small communities that often don't have the necessary resources or grant writers or things like that to be as successful as other communities?
Excuse me. I think it's a partnership with the federal level as well, with the planning organizations and things like that, to get those resources out to those communities that need them. The problems are readily identifiable, as we pointed out in a written testimony, that are causing the problems: narrow lanes, shoulder drop-offs, things that are easily rectified with proper finance and then proper design and things like that. But too often times those revenue dollars don't stream down to those communities for the reasons that you provided. So I think that we as a nation, we just need to figure out how to disseminate those dollars down the pipeline and then give them the tools that they need, whether it's a federal help center for smaller communities or something like that, to actually help them see where the dollars are and address them to the specific issues. But that would be helpful.
Thank you very much. And I wanted to address my next question to Mr. Clark. So my background is in corporate HR. I spent 4 years as the head of HR for a major U.S. company. And I was interested in the section of your testimony that spoke to workplace training as a percentage of payroll. According to studies you cited, transit agencies spend significantly less than suggested. Can you speak to the efficiencies that could be created if transit had better trained workforce and more opportunities? And what do you think the federal government should do to help?
Thank you very much for that question. And I should have expanded on that more in my testimony. I think that there is substantial evidence that better training leads to better results, that more training leads to better on-time performance, fewer accidents. A lot of people have talked about state of good repair and the maintenance of the system. It's hard to keep all that stuff up if you don't have the skills of the workforce at the level that you need to have them. And I actually have some data I could provide on that there are some great anecdotes, but also some very solid data in terms of Albany reducing its need for spare buses, for example, or SEPTA getting over a 700% return on its investment over a 4-year period by increasing training. I think that there are very, very substantial benefits there. And as I indicated, I think part of the federal role here is that the federal government spends a lot on capital, but doesn't spend nearly as much as it needs to on human capital. Secretary Millard talked about metrics and people just starting to pay attention to them. In my testimony, I said Dr. Beverly Scott, who's a former chair of APTA and a leader in the industry, and one of the mantras she often comes back to is, if you're not measuring it and if you're not holding people accountable on it, it doesn't happen. So that one of the things the federal government clearly can do is say, we want some good data on what's happening with your workforce. What are your projected retirements? How many people do you have in apprenticeship? What's the period of time it takes to get people trained? And getting some, it's going to take some time for that data to accumulate and be a useful tool, but good data is a good tool. I would also urge that National Transit Institute does some very good work. By their own admission, they focus almost entirely on the white-collar side of the workforce. I think some kind of federal resource for the frontline workforce could make a big difference. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I couldn't agree with you more. I think as we're investing in the infrastructure in this country, part of that has got to be work skill development, and the apprenticeship institute idea in a partnership between the government and the private sector is something that's very, very appealing to me and long overdue. So thank you so much. Madam Chairwoman, I yield the remainder of my time.